Yeah, I come to it sometimes. It's kind of and they publish compare. Yep. The journal compare. Yeah, it's kind of the Oxford conference on, and it's sometimes in St. Edmund. It's good. It's in the university. It is every other year. Yeah.
You know what? Actually, sorry. I'm going to take these mics and put them here, and then when you, because the table is so long, and then when we move, we could just move them over there. Okay. But as long as they're in the center of the table, they should pick up everything.
Okay. So we move both of them if we see them.
And the speakers will go up there, so
Yes.
that you have the camera.
Yes.
It goes there. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Just a few more to come in. It's a great pleasure to welcome you. Some of us are here in Oxford, and others of us are in places around the world in the live streaming. The title of the series that you're attending, it's week 5, is Re-examining the Meaning of Learning in an Uncertain World. So the series has been convened by David Johnson from the University of Oxford Department of Education and Andrew Cunningham from the Aga Khan Foundation in Geneva. And I think Andrew is attending at a distance with...
He is.
Yeah, and we have people in New Delhi or Mumbai also.
Doing a workshop.
So we probably have more people out of the room than we have in the room. But a warm welcome to everybody who braved the Oxford, bad cold weather to come. I'm Kathy Silva, and from the Department of Education here, and I will chair. And we have 3 really very interesting speakers whose I think it is going to cohere. And I'll begin with Kristen Bubb, who's from the Faculty of Education, or the School of Education, in the University of Illinois. And Kristen is going to talk about learning, context, emotion. Is there a link? That's Kristen's title. And then she'll be followed by Anita Reilly, who's next along. And Anita is from IRC, which is International Rescue Committee. And Anita's title is Social Emotional Learning, IRC Education in Emergency Contexts. So that will be the second. And I think that's a paper that you've prepared with Paul Frisoli together. Paul can't be with us, but he works also at IRC along with Anita. So it's kind of a joint paper, but Anita's going to present it. And the third speaker will be Alison Joyner, who's from the Aga Khan Foundation. And Alison's title is Supporting Socio-Emotional Learning in Tajikistan. And I think that Kristen also has some link to the Tajikistan work. So we'll have about 15-20 minutes from each of them. And we ask, unless you have an absolute burning question, wait till the end. We're planning half an hour for us to really talk. And Naseem, where are you? Naseem Mohammed, tending the baby, is going to be linking to people who are attending remotely. So after we've had the 3 presentations, we'll take questions from remote participants. So I think I'll begin by saying, Kristen, it's over to you, and we're looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. As I make my way over here, I want to thank Alison and Andy and for putting this together and for inviting me. It has been a long night. I left the U.S. last night and got here this afternoon, so I haven't slept in a couple days. So I apologize if I'm incoherent. This is also going to be a really good test for me of my socio-emotional skills because I wander when I teach, and so I'm going to be stuck in one spot. So this is going to be good for me. I'm excited to be here. My task is to sort of provide an overview of socio-emotional learning, thinking a little bit about what it is and whether it really matters. So we're going to define some terms very quickly. I'll look more specifically at socio-emotional learning. We'll take a quick look at what it looks like in children and what it also looks like in teachers or adults. And then we'll talk a little bit more about why it's important and why we're really talking about social skills, social emotional skills when we think about learning. I'll also briefly touch on whether it's worth the investment. Not surprisingly, since this is what I do, I believe it's worth the investment, but we'll actually provide some data to support that. And then we'll talk about some challenges to implementing socio-emotional learning programs in a variety of contexts. So again, I'm going to provide that brief overview, and then you're going to hear some actual practical applications of socio-emotional learning in different contexts for the rest of the panel. So briefly, emotions aren't really easy to define. When we talk about emotions with children, we tend to sort of point out what people are feeling. But generally, emotions are biologically based. They have evolved over time, and from childhood to adulthood, they evolve over time. They're basically broadly labeled as a response system. They're our response to our environment and our experiences. And they're often unseen. They're fluid. They change all the time. We often don't let people see them, and one of the reasons we don't let people see them is because we regulate those emotions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Emotions are often described as a tool by which we sort of look at our experiences, we take in our experiences, we appraise the meaning of our experiences and the significance of those experiences, and then we respond to them. So sometimes we're happy, sometimes we laugh, sometimes we're sad, we're disappointed, and we feel and experience those emotions. Most broadly, emotions are process. So really what we're talking about here is an interaction between us as individuals and our environment. And that may be our context, the place that we're sitting in right now, the people that you're sitting with, the people in the room with you. We're constantly interacting and experiencing emotions and changing those emotions. So it's a very fluid system. When I teach emotions to kids, this is what I show them. We talk about all these different emotions. I'm not going to make you talk about these. I'm going to assume you're generally familiar. These are some of your most common emotions. You can teach kids about emotions in a variety of ways, but this is one way to sort of get them to understand emotions when they're very young. Key piece about emotions is that they are culturally determined. Okay, so when I define emotions, you saw how broad that definition was, and that's because specific emotions and specific conversations about emotions are shaped by our environment. Culture defines which behaviors are appropriate and which aren't. Some behaviors that might be appropriate in the U.S. aren't going to be appropriate in other contexts, and vice versa. It guides an individual's perspective on what's important. So our culture helps us sort of take into account and appraise the situation and our experience, and then we feel emotions. And it also helps specify how we should feel and behave. So because of the fact that emotions are culturally determined, the use of Western measures, which is typically what we do, and you'll hear some of this a little bit later, aren't always appropriate for assessing socio-emotional development. And so you'll hear about the development of a tool that we've done in Tajikistan that's trying to assess more culturally appropriate socio-emotional tools. Emotions are also socially determined. So we get social signals from everybody around us. I always tell my students when I lecture on emotions that when they sit there and sleep or look really bored, they're sending me signals, and those affect my emotions. We generate and regulate our emotions based on those social signals. So they can influence the quality of our emotions as well as the intensity of our emotions. They are also the primary means by which we acquire social norms. So it's how we sort of start to understand norms. And so as adults, we actually send these messages to children and youth in their environment through our facial expressions, our tones of voice, those kinds of things that help convey the emotions that we're feeling and shape emotions. So you may sort of wonder why we're talking about emotions. Does this really even relate to learning? Is this really an educational topic? I told you I moved around. Emotions are critical for problem solving and for thinking. So without emotions, we don't effectively problem solve. They help us identify and control, which we'll talk about in just a second, which helps us remember things, retrieve things, transfer information, connect new information, all essential components of building new knowledge. Building new knowledge is one of the critical foundations of learning. Emotions drive our attention. They also drive our perceptions. Memories are retained for longer periods of time when emotions are more intense. So a teacher who can provide a strong emotion as they're teaching, or an adult who can provide a strong emotion with a concept, is going to help a child learn much better than if it's sort of a dull, flat, monotone lecture or conversation. All of this sort of leads us into this idea of socio-emotional learning. So we know emotions sort of play a role in this, but what is this concept of socio-emotional learning that we're talking about? Broadly, socio-emotional learning is the acquisition of the skills that we need to understand emotions and regulate those emotions. They help us maintain positive relationships with anybody, with other children, with peers, with teachers, with any adult, with siblings. And most importantly for academics, they help us achieve our goals. So those goals could be learning goals, they can also be social goals, they can be well-being goals, they can be employment goals, but emotions help drive us to do that. The reason that socio-emotional learning is complex is that it involves a lot of different skills. It involves cognitive skills, which we'll talk about in just a second, but things like attention, working memory, really much more concretely related to learning. We also see a set of behavioral skills like impulse control, sort of suppressing what we might want to do, which is jump up and ask a question in the middle of class when we're not supposed to. And a set of physiological responses. So biology plays a role in socio-emotional learning as well. And these are skills that we need to function successfully in society, which again is culturally determined. So what success means may differ from culture to culture and context to context. I mentioned earlier that we need to regulate emotions. This is a key piece of socio-emotional learning. When we think about emotion regulation or emotion control, we can think about those cognitive and those behavioral aspects. So behavioral aspects are things like impulse control, as I said, sort of managing emotions, managing a desire, managing our emotions, delaying our desire to do something until a little bit later. We often refer to these as behavioral regulation or something called effortful control. Essentially, broadly, these skills are the inhibition of some responses in favor of others, and they're not always consciously controlled. We don't usually think, I probably shouldn't stand up and yell. We just don't do it. And so we don't necessarily control that, at least consciously, most of the time. I always joke in my class, I now have lots of examples in the United States about impulse control with our new president who doesn't seem to be able to do that quite as often as we might like, and so he doesn't consciously control what he thinks and says all the time. So you can see a lack of impulse control in adults just as well as you can see it in children. We also have the more cognitive aspects, attention focusing. Can I attend to what the task is at hand? These are really related to learning. Can I tune out distractors? Can I switch tasks when the teacher tells me to switch tasks? Can I stop what I'm doing and move to a new task? And can I remember those tasks? So again, this is more cognitive regulation. We also refer to it as something called executive functioning. In the U.S., this executive functioning construct is really what gets people to buy into emotions as critical for learning. These are really about goal-directed behaviors, and they are usually consciously controlled. I'm going to skip through this part. To get to sort of the general description, basically socio-emotional skills involve behaviors that are conscious and unconscious, that change and inhibit or enhance emotions and experiences as a means to accomplish goals and function in society. And again, this accomplishing goals is probably one of the key aspects related to learning. Socio-emotional learning is comprised of a set of core competencies. You're going to see these several times today, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. This figure is borrowed from an organization called CASEL, where they basically put together what they believe are the key aspects, broad aspects of socio-emotional learning. Self-awareness is being able to recognize one's emotions and their impact on your own behavior as well as others' behavior. Self-management is sort of this impulse control. Can I sort of suppress some emotions or behaviors in favor of other ones? Social awareness, really perspective taking, empathy. You're going to hear quite a bit of this from Alison a little bit later. Relationship skills, core foundational relationship is important for learning for young children, those positive teacher-child and adult-child relationships, as well as peer relationships. And then responsible decision-making, making positive choices about behaviors and interactions. You see some of this coming in much more as kids get older, but you do see some responsible decision-making, or you'd like to see some of it in young children. What's this look like in young children? Highly skilled preschoolers are able to manage emotions with adult support. So most preschoolers can't do this on their own, but with adult support, they should be able to do it. They should be able to stay connected with adults, develop peer relationships, pay attention in class, and effectively join and contribute to groups. As we move into elementary school, or first through maybe 6th or 7th grade. We're looking for skills about navigating peer relationships without adult support, so adults should be taking more of a peripheral role here. There's the lack of sleep. They should be able to show their emotions and share their emotions appropriately. In middle school and high school, students should really be able to form close relationships with peers of both genders, so this isn't just same-sex peers now. Engage in responsible decision-making. We should see increased independence from adults. Manage complex academic and social demands, and begin preparing for adult roles. So one example is starting to nurture younger children, depending on the context that you're in. We should also see these in adults. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this. These are very similar to what I just went through, but you should see more of the high school and beyond characteristics in here. So adults should be able to recognize and manage their own emotions and understand how they impact others. They should build strong, warm, and supportive relationships with all of their students. Build relationships with other teachers, set firm but respectful boundaries, and deal with conflict fairly and effectively, and engage in kind, helpful behavior. So there's some warmth, there's some rule setting, there's some limit setting. So what you're really all here to know is whether this matters, and the answer is without a doubt. I always put this quote up when I talk about socio-emotional skills because I think it frames the importance of social-emotional learning. So the basic skills of socio-emotional learning are necessary for students to be able to take full advantage of their biological equipment and social legacy and heritage. As schools provide the conditions that allow even the most at-risk students, the students most at risk of failure, to become engaged in learning process, new possibilities open up and new life trajectories become available to students. So it really lays a foundation for all students, but particularly those who might be at risk for a variety of reasons. So children's regulatory styles at school entry are moderately predictive of their attendance across elementary school and high school, their school liking, and their academic achievement net of their cognitive skills. So everybody comes into school with the same cognitive ability. These regulatory styles, these regulatory skills still predict their school liking, their academic achievement, and their attendance. Children who experience these positive socio-emotional classrooms demonstrate better academic performance, higher verbal and reading skills, fewer behavior problems, including engagement in risky or delinquent behaviors, greater social competencies, fewer mental health problems, including depressive symptoms and anxiety, greater work productivity, greater earnings, and better relationships in general. So this is a very broad overview. This work is based on predominantly on studies out of the U.S., although they also draw on international studies. So it's not just evidence from the U.S. I will say that the vast majority of evidence right now comes from the U.S., but we're working on that. We're hoping that soon we'll be able to contribute much more international work. Why do we talk about these in school? Socio-emotional skills are actually thought to provide a critical foundation for learning and school success. And in fact, an economist in the U.S. has done some research to suggest that these skills are even more important than early cognitive skills. Children who enter with socio-emotional skills are more likely to succeed in school. Without these skills, lack of these skills have been shown to interfere with age-appropriate learning skills. Students in classrooms where teachers are able to create more positive learning experiences linked with stronger emotions do better, as I mentioned earlier. Positive or high social skills builds relational foundations that help children participate in group settings. For those who are in classrooms, we know that learning is a social process. Without those skills, you're not going to get those group interactions that are really fundamental for learning. Children with negative or low skills have fewer opportunities to interact with their peers throughout their lives, and they also receive more negative feedback from their teachers. I already said this. Why talk about teacher social competencies? Teacher social competencies are related to the quality of the relationship, as we looked at the core competencies, a fundamental aspect of socio-emotional learning. Teachers model socio-emotional competencies or socio-emotional learning for children, and so as adults, we model these behaviors, so we need to have good competencies. Teachers' socio-emotional competencies influence the classroom organization, the way they manage the classroom, how they interact with the children. Teachers who are calm and able to control their emotions are better able to create classrooms that encourage creativity and autonomy. Anybody who is a teacher or who has been a teacher knows that teaching is stressful, as is parenting. Teaching and parenting is stressful, and stress can lead to teacher burnout, becoming less engaged in teaching, or even quitting teaching. And so being able to sort of control and understand your emotions as an adult is a really critical aspect of keeping good teachers in the classroom. Social emotional competencies are not typically part of teacher preparation programs, and we'll address this again in a couple of minutes, despite the fact that teachers don't all have strong social skills. I'm always surprised when I walk into classrooms and I see some of the classrooms that I'm in, and I think, how do these people, they don't even look like they're enjoying working with youth of any age. So, as I said at the beginning, should we invest in socio-emotional learning? My answer is absolutely. There's so much evidence out there to suggest that it matters for well-being in general, not just academics. So for those who are particularly interested in academics, we can make the case for academics, but we can also make the case that these skills are really fundamental for child well-being, and you'll hear more of that in a little bit. They're particularly important right now as we see these economic constraints and societal changes threatening the supports that children have for healthy development. But for those who want hard numbers, I'm going to provide those hard numbers. This is an analysis, a cost-benefit analysis of 6 socio-emotional learning programs done in the United States. And basically what they found was that the benefits far exceed the cost. So for every $1 invested in a socio-emotional learning program, you get an $11 return. And I think what's even more powerful is that these are relatively large benefits, even though socio-emotional skills are much more difficult to measure than attainment scores and test scores, and many of the benefits of socio-emotional skills aren't even measured. And so this is likely a significant underestimate of the benefits of a socio-emotional learning program. Last but not least, challenges. I don't really have time to go into all the challenges, but I'm going to highlight some of the key challenges, and we'll talk a little bit more about them as you'll see. The identification and expression of emotions really varies considerably across cultures and contexts, as I mentioned at the beginning. And so sort of taking existing programs doesn't always work. Developing new programs is hard, but mapping existing programs onto culture, or changing existing programs to be culturally relevant, is one approach to doing this. But the standards that you create really need to be culturally sensitive, or it's not going to be an effective program. Existing socio-emotional programs are commonly based on Western values. So taking those programs and putting them in a non-Western context isn't going to work, at least not as they are. Adaptation works absolutely fine, as you'll hear about, but taking them as they are is not going to be beneficial. Probably one of the more challenging aspects in the United States that we deal with is that socio-emotional learning is not typically part of teacher or professional development for anybody in the school system, anybody working with the kids. But successful implementation of socio-emotional programs requires adequate guidance for adults. So we can't just assume that anybody in the classroom can do this. We have to help them do this, and we have to help them do it well. Similarly, socio-emotional learning programs and practices are often add-ons to curriculum. Anybody who is a teacher or anybody who has been in a classroom does not want to hear, here's another program for you, does not want a layer. What they want is something that's going to make their job easier, and it's going to be integrated in the classroom. And socio-emotional learning programs can easily be integrated into a classroom, but it does take some work to get that done. And it can't just be slapped on top. Just to give you a sense, these are my last 2 slides, just to give you a sense of where we are. So not surprisingly, you can hear from my accent that I am from the United States. We like to believe that we are far ahead of everybody else in our programs and practices. So I've got 2 maps here for you. These are socio-emotional learning standards for preschool. The blue states, all of the blue states represent states that have socio-emotional learning standards for preschoolers. So for preschool, we do a really nice job, okay? We make sure that our kids are our teachers are well trained, and we make sure that the kids have standards and expectations. You move out of preschool, and we're doing a terrible job. These 4 states right here have comprehensive socio-emotional learning programs, and that's it. These have 1 or 2 standards. These have a couple of more. And the rest, all these gray states here, have nothing for anybody kindergarten and above. So while we like to believe we do a really nice job, we've not yet bought into the importance of socio-emotional learning for anybody who's not older than preschool. But as you're going to hear about, these skills are critical across the developmental spectrum. You can teach these skills in preschool, you can teach these skills in middle school, you can teach these skills in high school, you can continue to teach these skills in adulthood. That may be harder to teach, but you can do so, and you can do so effectively. So thank you very much. I can't remember. Anita's next. Yep. Yes.
It's brilliant. No one would believe you slept all night on the bed.
I do this a lot.
Yeah. Anita, I'll just remind everybody, Anita's title is Socio-Emotional Learning, IRC Education in Emergency Contexts. And Anita's giving it kind of jointly with Paul Faisoli.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. My name is Anita. I'm an Education Technical Advisor at IRC, and I'm stepping in for Paul Faisoli, who couldn't be with us today. So I'm an Education Technical Advisor. I cover West Africa. I'm based in London. For those of you who don't know IRC, it's the International Rescue Committee. IRC is a global organisation that works with children affected by conflict and disaster. And our mission statement is we help people whose lives and livelihoods have been shattered by conflict or disaster, and we help them to survive, recover, and gain control of their futures. So, of course, education is integral to our mission. And what we have found when we talk to people, when we talk to parents, when we talk to caregivers, when we talk to children who are in the midst of conflict and disaster, is that alongside shelter, alongside food, they always prioritise education. So even if they're in the midst of conflict, if they're displaced, parents still want to send their children to school. It still rises to the top of the list. And we know that education is especially important in these contexts because these children have been exposed to trauma, to violence, they've been displaced, their lives have been disrupted, and education helps create a sense of normality again. It helps establish a routine, it helps ensure that they're with their peers, and importantly, it helps them retain a sense of hope for their futures. So, education is particularly important for children who've been traumatized, who've been affected by conflict. We work with children who have faced multiple severe, repeated adversities. So we're working with children who may have lost loved ones, may have lost a parent, they've been displaced, they may be victims of violence themselves or exposed to violence. They may be separated from their families. And what neuroscience tells us is children who've been exposed to these severe adversities, this has a negative impact on their brain development, and it can result in what we call toxic stress. So, toxic stress can lead to changes in the brain structure and function, and it can interrupt the normal development of a child. And we know that some of the immediate effects of toxic stress are a decrease in a child's physical and mental well-being. And we also know that the impact of toxic stress affects the skills that children need for learning. So it can affect their ability to focus, their ability to concentrate, their ability to filter out distractions. It can affect their working memory, their long-term memory. And then there's long-term effects of toxic stress as well, on health, on relationships, and on behaviour. But what the evidence and research also tells us is that this negative impact of toxic stress can be mitigated or reversed with the right interventions. We know that social emotional learning can help rebuild healthy brain structure or neurological pathways or connections. We know that SEL interventions can reduce the impact of toxic stress by providing children with the tools to focus, by providing children with the tools to regulate their emotions, with the tools to interact positively with their peers or with adults, and with the tools to cope with stress. Social and emotional learning interventions have also been shown to build academic performance, which has already been talked about. There's a positive correlation between SEL interventions and academic performance. Also a positive correlation, it helps develop pro-social skills and increases children's confidence and self-image. It can help reduce aggression. It's been shown to help reduce emotional distress, and it's been shown to reduce or decrease conduct problems. So of course we know that reading, we know literacy and numeracy skills are essential, but I guess what we're saying is that these social and emotional learning skills are also essential. And we were having a chat earlier about what quality education means, and it's no longer these narrow academic focus. We have to kind of broaden it out to ensure that any definition of quality education includes social and emotional skills as well. So social emotional learning is needed. It's the ability to remember and manage information, the ability to recognize and regulate emotions, the ability to set goals and persevere, and the ability to interact positively with adults and with peers. So for the IRC, it's related to what we already saw from Castle. We've broken it down into 5 components, and it's a little bit different from Castle because we're specifically focusing on children who've been affected by conflict or disaster. So we've broken it down into 5 components, or competencies rather. The first one is what we've called brain building, which is executive functioning, but brain building is a bit more palatable. The next is emotional regulation. The next is, I have to remember my icons, positive social interactions. The next is conflict resolution, and then this is perseverance. So I'll just take one by one and talk through each. So the first one I'll talk about is brain building or executive function. And these are the basic cognitive skills that allow a person to focus, organize information, and complete tasks. It's a set of skills that help us to filter out distractions and control impulses. So we know that we try and develop brain building skills in children because it helps them process information and it helps them learn better. So some examples of these skills are listening skills, the ability to focus attention and follow directions, the ability to organize steps and information in a logical manner. Emotion regulation then is the set of skills that allow us to understand our emotions and manage our feelings in a positive manner. So when we develop lesson plans, we have some lessons that try and get children to identify their feelings, some lessons that focus on predicting feelings, and then implementing emotion regulation strategies. So it could be belly breathing or counting backwards, for example. Positive social skills, Kristen already talked a little bit about as well. These are the skills which allow us to relate to each other in a positive way. I guess it's needless to say that I think it's obvious why all of these skills are important for children that are affected by conflict. It helps children understand other people's feelings and behaviour. And of course, we're often working in context with displaced people. There's often tensions between communities, host communities and displaced communities. In a lot of the contexts we work, IDPs are integrated into formal education systems, and there's a lot of conflict around resources, etc. So it's important for children who've been displaced and affected by conflict as well, because it helps them build those very important supportive social networks that in turn helps them build resilience. And the next one is related, conflict resolution skills, and this is the set of skills which help children address conflict in a positive manner and minimise the impact of conflict on people involved. So again, I'm just thinking of our lesson plans. Some of them are focused on helping children constructively deal with conflict in a constructive and peaceful manner. And they focus on getting children to identify the problem, to generate solutions, and again to implement conflict resolution strategies. And then the final competency is perseverance. And this is a set of skills that allow children to push through challenges and to continue to work towards a realistic goal and maintain hope. Again, this is important for children who've experienced severe adversities. These children have often lost a lot and may be unable to see the purpose of setting goals, or may not be able to focus on future goals. And these skills also help children recognise that with learning you need to be persistent. And it also helps children see alternative ways of reaching goals. So we've also started to integrate mindfulness into our SEL programs, given the research that it can have a direct impact on brain function and prefrontal cortex function. So that's just our definition of mindfulness, the state of being aware and focused on the present moment and accepting what is happening. So how we teach SEL, I guess consistent across our education programs is that any instruction should be in a supportive and caring environment, in an environment where children are comfortable expressing their views and expressing their feelings. And we kind of have two approaches, main approaches to teaching SEL. So it can be explicit. So through the development of lesson plans, it's explicit, it's focused, it's sequenced. So it's targeted on developing specific skills. We develop let's say, a 30-minute lesson that teachers can then take and implement in their classrooms or safe spaces. Or we can infuse it across academic areas and reinforce it throughout daily pedagogical and classroom management practices. We also reinforce social and emotional skills through recreation and creation activities. And often we will work with parents and caregivers in our communities, again, to reinforce social and emotional skills. And we have developed a toolkit particularly focused on parents and communities. Like I said, I cover our education programs in West Africa. So one of the programs we have at the moment is in northeast Nigeria. So we're working with kids there who've been affected by the Boko Haram insurgency. They've been displaced. They've been exposed to multiple adversities. Some of them had lost parents. Some of them have been exposed to trauma, violence, etc. All the while dealing with existing in extreme poverty and all the challenges that brings. So in Nigeria we've set up non-formal education programs. We've adapted the government program for the context, for the emergency context, and we've infused SEL. So it's a 9-month program. We've trained learning facilitators in the communities, and we've developed a 9-month scope and sequence alongside daily lesson plans. And we're hoping that the next phase, now that these communities and parents and children are moving back to their communities, we're hoping that the next phase of the project, now that schools are reopening after many years have been closed, we're hoping in the next phase we'll work with formal school teachers. In Sierra Leone, it's a different approach. The context obviously is very different. We're working with children who've been out of school for an extended period of time due to closure because of Ebola. Again, many of these children are living in extreme poverty, face multiple adversities. Many have been isolated, many have lost loved ones due to Ebola. In that programme, we work with formal school teachers, and we've started the first phase of the programme where we're integrating mindfulness activities into their formal lessons. So they do 2 10-minute mindfulness activities every day. So that's the first phase. And in the next academic year, we're going to introduce brain games, which are just fun games to improve executive function. So that's kind of 2 different approaches and 2 different contexts. It's a new area for us. There isn't, as we were saying, there's not much research as of yet, especially in these contexts. So we've started an impact evaluation research with NYU and Harvard in Lebanon, Niger, Sierra Leone. And this is seeking to rigorously evaluate what works to improve children's learning, well-being in crisis-affected contexts. And also how, where, and for whom it works, and at what cost. So, be prepared. That would be our next IRC presentation. So, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Anita. We look forward. When will we have results from this?
Soon, the first results should be pretty soon. Yeah. Hoping for Uckfiat actually in September will be the first.
That's a conference that will be taking place here in September in Oxford. Yeah, and it's the Oxford, I forget the full name of it. Oxford, it's the International and Comparative Conference. So think about that and find out about it. So now we have Alison Joyner, who's our third. And Alison gave me her talk, and I know it's about Tajikistan, supporting socio-emotional learning in Tajikistan. So, over to you.
Thank you. So good evening, my name's Alison Joyner, and I'm part of the same team as Andy Cunningham, based in Geneva, supporting the education programming of the Aga Khan Foundation in 16 countries in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. So, as Kathy says, my presentation is going to present some work that has been done by the Aga Khan Foundation in Tajikistan as a starting point for work that we hope will be taken out to all of our programs eventually. And I'm actually speaking on behalf of my colleague here, Zulobi, and this is a very unflattering photograph of him. Normally he's smiling a lot of the time or laughing, but he unfortunately was unable to come himself because he didn't get his visa in time. So I'm presenting on behalf of work that he and his colleagues have been doing in Tajikistan to look at both the assessment of and the teaching of social emotional learning, indeed supported by Dr. Kristen as a consultant for us, so I'll be speaking more about that. And this is in the context, as we've already mentioned, of this idea of the whole seminar series of broadening our definition of the meaning of learning, going beyond just academic learning to the wider social, emotional and well-being of children. And you can see in this photograph, this is in Tajikistan, and in the back of the photograph you see methodologists, they're called, experts who are long-time teachers from Tajikistan, who are now part of the Institute for Professional Development, which is our government partner in the part of Tajikistan where we work. And all of our work is done in very close collaboration with them, which is absolutely critical to its success. And just to situate Tajikistan for you, for those of you who may not be completely familiar with it, it's a former Soviet republic, as you can see, bordered by Afghanistan, on the border with Afghanistan. And the part where we work in Gorda-Badakhshan province, where most of our work takes place, is literally just the other side of the river from this part of Afghanistan. And then obviously to the west of China, which is a growing influence, and so on. So very remote rural areas in most cases, not trauma affected in most cases, although there have been elements of incidents of conflict. So that is there in the background. So the work in Tajikistan started with the idea to follow up an ECD impact study, an early childhood development impact study that was carried out in 2010, following the establishment of small early childhood development centres, preschools, in just a few villages in the part of Tajikistan where we were working, to do a proof of concept, really. The preschools that had been established or had functioned during the Soviet period had mainly collapsed. And so the idea was to try to re-establish some form of early childhood development. And so children were assessed, those who had been and who had not been to early childhood development centres in this 2010 study, to show that there was a very big percentage difference between children who had been and who had not been in grade 1 when they were assessed for language and maths. So we had these cohorts of children that had been assessed, and we wanted to go back and see where they were by that time in grades 4, 5, 6 of primary. And so we decided, because we wanted to open up this idea of what we mean by learning, to look beyond just the academic achievement and to look at the social and emotional skills as well. In order to do that, we needed to create some kind of a tool. So we started with our colleagues and government partners in Tajikistan with a review of existing tools. And as Kristen has explained, these come mainly from the United States, some from the United Kingdom, Australia we looked at. And those tools were, the items were taken, looked at, adapted for the context. And these are just some examples. We came up with 18 items, but these were some of them: responsibility, helpfulness, sharing, cooperation, handling disagreement, motivation, empathy, respectfulness and handling being upset, the kinds of things that we've been looking at. Bearing in mind, as Kristen said, that you can't just take items or questions from a Western tool or a tool that's been developed outside of the context without thinking very carefully about the implications of that context. And specifically here in this part of Tajikistan, it's very culturally unusual and not really that accepted to talk about emotions. So a child, if you ask them, how do you feel, won't really understand that question. So we had to frame questions around happiness or sadness. That's something that they can relate to. And indeed, in some of the terms that we use for emotions don't even exist as words in the languages that they use. And indeed, we're talking about a context where there are two different languages being used. And we identified these items and used them with teachers, parents, and students. So the same questions, more or less adapted slightly for the different respondents, were asked of those three groups. And this slide shows, and the colours don't come out very well, unfortunately, but they show the grouping of how the results played out, how the children were scored across those three groups in order of high score. So you can see that number 1 was respectful. And the reason that we group it like this is that what we see is that in the agreement between these different groups, between teachers, parents and students, was highest where the children's scores were highest. So the interpretation of that was that this was where people felt comfortable, they understood what we were talking about. Whereas when you get down to these lower areas, things like patience, concentration, handling disagreement, the kinds of executive function and emotional control things that we've been looking at in the other presentations, were much lower, scored much lower, but there was also much less agreement. So there was less understanding of what we meant by these terms and these concepts. And critically, these top 5 or 6 here, respectful, responsible, helpful, cooperative, being able to share, were in discussion with our colleagues and counterparts there, identified as those which in the society, in the community, are considered to be really important. The idea of mutual respect, which these represent, is what children are prepared as in their overall education to demonstrate. Whereas these skills at the bottom, that we would consider to be the kind of some of the key social emotional learning skills, are not. They scored lowly and were not really recognised that well. And the blue traits are the ones that correlated more strongly with with learning outcomes. So one of the key conclusions of this was that indeed, as Kristen has said, the teachers and the adults taking care of these children were not familiar with these terms, were not familiar with the idea of talking about emotions, understanding how to support children to manage them. And this was a key point for future programming. We found that the teacher report results gave a high Alpha Cronbach reading of 0.84. So therefore it was a reliable tool compared with the parent and student reports, which were much less reliable. So we decided to continue just with the teacher report results in pursuing the use of this tool. Indeed, with by that time with support from Kristen, who advised that indeed at this kind of age, children's reports would be difficult to rely on, and teachers would generally be the best reporters. So we correlated the results of teachers' assessment of children's social and emotional learning with their academic results, so in language and mathematics. And we found that these were the areas of their social and emotional skills that came out most strongly: confidence, expressing opinions, following instructions, creativity, determination, motivation, curiosity. No surprises there, really. But these were the skills on which the children had scored, in fact, most lowly in the social emotional assessment. So this reinforced our conclusion that we needed to work on supporting teachers to support children in these areas, with the hope that it would both improve their academic skills, but also, as we've been saying, general well-being and ability to interact socially, and as for all the good reasons that Kristen highlighted for us. And so one of the first steps to take in response to this was indeed to look at teacher professional development and teacher training. As Kristen said, this social emotional learning had not been an explicit part of AKF's programming until then, although a lot of implicit work on this had been done. We focus on a child-friendly environment in the classroom, on group work, for example, encouraging children to ask questions. We have a family reading program to support their work, their relationships with their parents at home. But still, it was clear that we were not giving teachers enough explicit support to support children in classrooms and help them understand the importance of these aspects of life. So this is a photograph of a workshop that was held in Chorog, led by Kristen, in fact. But this here, the lady on the left there, is my colleague Nafisa, another colleague of Zulobis, helping to start teaching these participants, who are both the methodologists from the local government counterpart, plus colleagues from Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan, because, as I said, we want to roll this out, and so this became a regional workshop, which took place in 4 languages. And these colleagues here are both from Afghanistan and Tajikistan, and they share a language across the border, a local dialect. So this was to start introducing the idea of emotions to these people as adults, who themselves were not that comfortable with the idea and felt that they although they were experienced teachers in all cases, had not had enough support. And so the idea of this workshop was to introduce this to those who would be teacher trainers and indeed programmers from the AKF point of view, and start thinking about how we can actually build this into teacher training and support in the future. And I'd like to pause here to take a step back and refer to the seminar of last week, which some of you may have seen or heard about, which was focusing on pluralism, which is a concept that AKDN, the Aga Khan Development Network, supports under the leadership of His Highness the Aga Khan, who has established these institutions. Pluralism is the idea of embracing and benefiting from the richness of difference. It goes by various names: global citizenship, but basically embracing the idea of the richness of diversity. And I want to just highlight that the key connections between pluralism, which we can break down into these ideas on the left: identity, encounter, engage, self-awareness, open-mindedness, relationship building, ethical decision-making, and collaboration, and how closely those ideas map onto these competencies of social emotional learning that we've been talking about. And as Kristen has already referred to, in our current world and the way it's going, I think we can all agree that these are skills and aptitudes that we need to build in children for future generations, and in adults if that's possible. And so from the Aga Khan Development Foundation point of view, pluralism is something that we want to promote. So if we're able to measure and talk about how the benefits of the competencies of social emotional learning, we're actually going a long way to being able to show what we can do in terms of supporting pluralism and to measure the benefits of that. So indeed, as I said, we wanted to take steps towards supporting teachers to provide a more supportive environment for children in their classrooms around social emotional learning. So thanks to Kristen's advice, we were able to work in Tajikistan with a classroom assessment scoring system, which some of you may be familiar with, which is a tool developed by Pianta in the United States. And it's an assessment, it's an observation tool for teachers. Many of you will be familiar with classroom observation. But rather than counting group work or counting questions that are asked by the teacher, for example, which is the way in the past AKF had tended to look at classrooms, this tool focuses on the relationships between teachers and their students and between students in the classroom. But obviously we couldn't just take it as it was, as we've said, we need to adapt it. So my colleagues in Tajikistan took the tool and, as you can see, broke it up into a few more pieces in order to reflect aspects of their programming that they consider to be important, particularly assessment and evaluation, the idea of competencies, which is part of the curriculum in Tajikistan, so reflecting the national education system, and particularly the use of different strategies which have been incorporated into training previously. This RP is relevance pedagogy, which is bringing the outside world into the classroom. So both in terms of content, but also in terms of the aspects that you see which are familiar, the classroom climate, the classroom organisation areas, which are similar, the actual way that those concepts were described and explained in the tool were adapted for the context in Tajikistan. I should say this is an ongoing process, but it's the idea is that this tool can be used, and the class tool is designed to be used both as a professional development tool, so as something that you can use with teachers to observe them, and then to support them afterwards in a conversation and identify where there is a need for further work on the part of the teacher, and then to monitor that progress. But also as a way to assess for research purposes at a particular point in time, and then compare, for example, with children's social emotional learning assessments and ultimately and potentially academic skills as well, academic learning assessment as well. So this is one of the tools that we're building into both programming and also into the next study that we have been working on in Tajikistan. So indeed, the second part of the research that's been happening so far in Tajikistan is a study that now for which the data collection has just been completed. So we don't yet have findings, unfortunately. But using the two tools that I've already referred to, the classroom quality observation tool and the teacher report version of the previously used tool, with a few additions relating to executive function based on Kristen's advice. So looking at, for example, asking questions about how well children can concentrate on a task, how well they're able to complete a task or follow instructions. And then finally, we've also integrated an adapted version of a tool used in Nepal to look at children's sense of support. So indeed, this tool was originally developed for a context more similar to the ones that Anita has been describing, where children are in a conflict situation. But it's been adapted for Tajikistan to look at where children are in terms of their sense of, if they can go, for example, to somebody if they're worried about something. Do they have friends? Do they have somebody that they can go to if they're afraid? If they're afraid to go somewhere, for example. Are they afraid of earthquakes or avalanches? It was another question. So we want to try to get a sense directly from children of how they're doing and see how those results compare with the results of the other tools. So as I say, this is an ongoing study, and we hope to have results, and I think we will also be presenting this at ACFIAT probably in September. So finally, I wanted just to highlight that we're expecting to develop these tools and adapt them for other places where AKF is working. As Kathy said, Andy is currently in Delhi with other colleagues looking at how these tools can be used in Afghanistan, Bangladesh and Syria. And this is a photograph of a school in Kenya on the coast where I was last week visiting and saw this on the blackboard. And here we can see that already they're talking about the importance in their core values of teamwork, efficiency, integrity, respect for individual differences. So we can see here that we have a context in which hopefully we have a fertile ground for starting to look at social emotional learning, even if it's not yet explicitly addressed either in teacher training, etc. So I'd just like to conclude with a quotation from His Highness the Aga Khan, in fact, to highlight the importance of social emotional learning, not just for advancing children's academic learning, but just for the well-being, for their well-being and for the well-being of the world. A society which not only accepts difference, but actively seeks to understand it and learn from it, is a cosmopolitan one. Is promoting this cosmopolitan ethic. And in this perspective, diversity is not a burden to be endured, but an opportunity to be welcomed. And I think that that's an important message for us all to take away. So thank you very much, and please don't hesitate to contact us.
Thank you, Alison. Lovely, concrete examples, and good to see the children. I think we might open it up, and we will open it up for us, but I also want to open up with our remote participants. So, Nassim, what's the best way to do that?
So Nasim's not here.
Okay.
Paige and myself have been monitoring.
Yeah.
So if you want to take a couple of questions, and then we can take one from the online, because people have been sending
Okay,
questions in.
okay. So I don't know what you've done in other sessions. Why don't we take 2 or 3 together? Yeah, and then we'll take two from this audience and one from our remote audience. Is there any? But don't feel it has to be a question. You may have a comment you want to extend. Really, it's up to you to participate in the form you want.
I can kick it off because everybody's hesitant to be the first question. So
Thank
this is
you.
actually from an online, this is from the online audience. So this is from Dana Schmidt, which is, at what age are SEL skills most malleable, and how do these skills interact with gender in terms of how they are taught and in terms of how they impact outcomes?
Okay, quite a complicated question, but we'll hold that. And is there anybody who has another question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Peter Hinton. I'm doing a DPhil in local schools in Africa.
Yes.
I'm trying to link finance to education quality, early years in preschool. So I'm very interested in SEL, and what we observe is a lot of teachers in these low-cost schools who have been to any teacher training, they learn on the job. So their role models are what they were brought up with, which is typically chalk and talk. So I'm just interested in whether you've come across models or how you found the teacher training that you've been doing to get SEL at the teacher level to then go down to the child level. What examples you've seen of doing that at scale, and how affordable can it be in this kind of emerging market context?
Okay, we have one more. Yep, sorry? Yes. Say who you are.
Helen Campbell-Pickford from the department here. Could you say a bit more about the relationship between executive function and self-regulation? I'm not sure whether they're sort of different words for the same thing, or whether you're using them as really separate concepts.
Okay, we've had, the questions are really into kind of 2 groups. One is, how malleable are these skills? Are there gender differences in them? And then the specific question from Helen about executive function and self-regulation, are they alike? I think that's probably, we'll begin with you, yeah. But the other question was more, and it came from Peter, was teacher training, and the more practical question, how do we kind of enhance teacher skills in these directions? So shall we begin with Kristen on kind of the theory?
The malleable question?
Yeah, malleable and gender.
So that's a great question, and the answer is that the skills are malleable across the lifespan, but young children typically, as in preschool age, typically tend to be more responsive to learning new ways of interacting, learning new skills. And so what we see are intervention programs that typically target younger children. We don't have a ton of intervention programs that target older youth in terms of helping them build those skills, because we assume they had those skills when they were young. So the assumption is they've already had it and we don't do it. That being said, the few programs that do focus on fostering socio-emotional skills in middle childhood and adolescence have been shown to be effective. So they are malleable skills even as kids get older. But in terms of a key developmental period, early childhood is probably where you'll see most efforts right now.
Okay.
I'm an early childhood person, and that's where I would put my money, but that doesn't mean that programs that exist for older kids should just be ignored, because they do change.
And Dina also had the question about gender, boys and girls.
So this is a hard question because it's really culturally driven. Boys receive different messages than girls in most contexts, in most cultures. What's okay to express in terms of emotions really differs depending on what culture and context you're in. Even in the United States, we always say to little boys don't cry, or boys don't cry. And so they're receiving those messages very quickly that expression of emotion is not okay, or different expression. We accept sort of rough and tumble interactions with boys. It's just boys being boys. Girls are expected to be courteous. And so we do see gender differences in the display of behaviors, not necessarily in their reception to being taught new behaviors. I don't know a ton of work out there that's really looked at whether girls are more receptive or boys are more receptive to intervention programs. But we do see differences in these socio-emotional skills, partly because of what we convey to youth and to children about what's acceptable behaviors for boys and girls.
Okay. Helen had the question about executive function and self-regulation, where they overlap, or how do they relate to one another?
So that's the million-dollar question, honestly. So we in the field of self-regulation, we don't really have a good definition, and one of the reasons is that we're not sure exactly where these skills differentiate developmentally. So when we talk about self-regulation, we often talk about all the skills that I mentioned up there, those behavioral skills, those cognitive skills. And we do that because at very young ages, we don't see a lot of differences between those skills. Kids are just using whatever they can to do what they need to do to follow the rules. As we get older, we see that conscious decision making about engaging in a behavior versus unconscious sort of behavioral response and control. And that's where we start to think about executive functioning skills, which we do control and which help us attain goals, and behavioral skills, which we could control if we put our mind to it, but often we sort of know what's socially acceptable and therefore we behave in that way. So your question is good because for many reasons, but one is that we talk about them all as one thing early on. So self-regulation, executive functioning, they're all sort of the same thing, and they just start to differentiate as they get older. Executive functioning is a set of skills within a broader context of self-regulation, if you will.
We have Peter Hinton's question, I think maybe to Anita and to Alison. It's about teacher training. What are the models? I think both of you have had experience, have you not, in training teachers in SEL. Do you want to, I don't know who wants to go first?
I can speak to our model. It's not at scale yet, and this is related to the research that we're now doing. So, for example, in Sierra Leone, we're only working in 24 schools, a mixture of, mostly in primary schools, and these are a mixture of government-approved schools, almost government-approved schools, community schools. And our model, it's not just an SEL program, it's a literacy, early literacy program and general pedagogy. Many of these teachers have had no training, they're community teachers, etc. And it's a kind of a three-pronged approach, so they have face-to-face training once a year at the beginning of each academic year. And then we have learning coaches who work with a cluster of schools. And they're previous teachers with a lot of experience, and we train them up as mentors. And then we have teacher learning circles, and they take place every month. So that's the That's the model that we usually work with. We're hoping we'll be able to say more about that model. And we, of course, we work with government and we train government and inform government as we go along. So once we've got some results from this research, we'll be able to say more about the cost. And we'll be able to say more to the government about recommendations around the scale-up.
Okay, thanks, Anita. Alison, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, the experience in Tajikistan is quite different from the kind of context you'd be working with in Africa, but I think, as I mentioned, the approach that we have, we would probably try to adapt to something similar in a various contexts. The key point is obviously teaching teachers themselves about their own emotions, starting with themselves and helping them to understand why they feel what they feel, how they express it, etc., in order to then be able to pass that on to children and manage classrooms which facilitate that. So that would be the focus of training. Obviously the key thing is how do you do that? In Tajikistan we're in this very privileged position of having such a close relationship with the government authority, which has a certain amount of resources to support teacher training and support. So what they're planning is based on the identification of the kinds of issues, the priority issues from the assessment tool that we were talking about, to do monthly trainings. But that's part of the system in Tajikistan, so that's quite a luxury. But I think we would still, in Africa, attempt to simulate a similar kind of process based on adapted to the context. So definitely starting with teacher training. But the key point is not just the training, but it's the follow-up support. It's the having people visit. And obviously you try to do that with the government. The trouble is that the government people who are supervisors or whatever to do that often don't have cars, or they don't have petrol for their cars, they don't have the ability to get to the schools, etc. And they may not be that great at supporting teachers when they get there. So it's complicated, but I think the principle of starting with the teachers and then seeing how they're doing in working with the children is the main point.
Can I just add one thing, because you asked how that sort of trickled down to the children. That was part of your question. And one of the primary ways is that modeling that I talked about. Teachers who talk about their emotions and identify their emotions get kids to do that. And as they're doing that, they can do it through a variety of activities with the kids, including emotion labeling. How does this make you feel? You're going to be first in line. How does that make you feel? Those kinds of things. Integrating that into the classroom so the kids are actually doing that too. But in addition to that, teachers are also, children are also encouraged to engage in emotional interactions where the teacher now knows how to manage them because of these kinds of trainings. So building that positive relationship and making it a safe space to engage in more emotional interactions it is really how it trickles down to kids. You can certainly explicitly teach kids just like you explicitly teach the children, but most of the work that I've done in low-income communities in the United States, we've not had to explicitly teach the kids. We've seen tremendous changes in their behaviors by explicitly teaching the teachers.
I'm reminded of several papers in child development that mothers whose children are between 1.5 and 2.5, who talk about emotions and talk about other states of mind, have the kinds of children who adjust better in nursery school and have better reading scores. I don't know whether they have a cognitive functioning control, but they should. But it begins in the family, but what you're saying is that the school context can really do it as well. I think we should go to our remote audience, yeah?
Yeah, so Lee Spanner, who is getting their master's in higher education here at Oxford, has a question. And she says, I wonder how far local communities themselves are involved in defining what social emotional skills will benefit pupils in their specific context.
Okay, and this was Lee, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, we take another one?
Sure. This one comes from Andy Cunningham, who actually says that he had the privilege of actually being with Alison Joyner on one of her school visits in Kenya. And what struck him was a desire by a school teacher to measure the school motto, building future confident leaders. What, and this is to you, Dr. Bubb, what would be your recommendation to this teacher?
I think this was such a direct one. Right there, yeah. To Kristen from Andy Cunningham.
Correct.
So why don't we begin with that, and then local communities, I think, go both to Anita and to Alison about what's the kind of understanding of local communities. So we'll begin with you, Kristen.
All right, thank you, Andy. I appreciate the direct question. So it sounds like she's really interested in measuring a lot of the things that this tool that we've developed in Tajikistan is measuring in terms of the core values of the community. And so I would certainly recommend starting by identifying what it is that they think are important aspects of confidence. And I can't remember all three of the things that you listed. Confidence.
Team building.
For
the motto. Was
confidence.
Respect for difference.
Okay.
And integrity.
So one of the first things that she can do is ask her students what that means to them, trying to get a sense of what the kids think respect for differences means. What's that look like at different ages? I'm guessing these are probably mixed age classrooms, so it's going to mean something very different to each of the kids in the classroom. She can use some of the items that tap into that respect, those differences that we've developed for a different context, and adapt those. But there are lots of, starting with the kids, starting with the community is the first place to go, and asking those questions within the community, which actually fits nicely with the next question, is really a first step in getting a good sense of how you measure that motto.
I think we're now over to Alison and to Anita on what the local communities, what's their understanding.
Sure. Well, really, it builds off what Kristen's been saying. I would say that in Tajikistan, the work that we've been doing is with the methodologists and the people that we've been working with is quite a good proxy for the communities, because these are people who come, for the most part, from the villages, or they have at least families in villages. So they are very close to those people. And I think that going forward, there will be a lot more work with parents, because we have a close relationship with parents through different aspects of the programming. So I think it's a good point, actually, that we should probably ensure that parents are aware of what we're doing in relation to social and emotional learning. And I think that the visits that Andy's referred to, that I also referred to, gave us an opportunity indeed to speak with parents, and they were very interested in these ideas and very interested in being able to measure better these kinds of ideas, and so indeed posing them these kinds of questions. What does this mean? What is important in this community?
But Alison, when you showed us the data where I think respect was at the very top, but I thought that was from teachers and parents, wasn't
yes,
it?
Indeed,
Also?
in Tajikistan
So,
those were...
Yeah, so I mean there is some extrapolation you can do from that bit of data.
The parent responses were not that reliably, like the tool was not that reliable when we came to analyse it, but indeed, yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe
that was why we did
asked
that
properly.
Yeah, potentially.
In the best way.
Yeah.
Anita?
I know when we were developing our Safe Healing Learning Spaces toolkit, which will be, it's aimed to be used with communities, teachers and parents, that parents were involved in the constructs, and their views and opinions were informed the toolkit. I can only say from direct experience, let's say in Nigeria, for example, when we have programming in Nigeria, it's with displaced communities, that the program regularly has meetings with parents, with community leaders, and informs them of exactly what we're doing, exactly what...
But that kind of informs them. What's
rather
coming
than the
back
other way
from
around.
them.
Yeah.
And you do that as well.
Yeah, I can't speak to exactly the process, but I know that when that toolkit was developed, that there were focus
There was
discussions.
input.
Yeah.
Any more?
I was just going to really quickly
Kristen.
add to that. As I said earlier, this is culturally driven, and so if you don't involve the communities in the context and the development of these tools, and really identifying which of the socio-emotional skills are critical within that context, whatever you measure isn't going to be as helpful as you'd like it to be. It's really got to be community driven. So I know the items that we've got in this tool were driven by what's important in that context. I'm working in a very rural area in Tanzania right now. We've gone into families, we've gone into schools, we've asked exactly the questions that we're asking. What does this word mean to you? Is it important to you? What's it look like? What are the behaviors that it looks like? And we're doing the same thing with a similar sort of program in Uganda, really trying to get at what do these different aspects of socio-emotional learning look like. But it is all community driven, and without that, I don't think you have the success that you could have with these programs and these tools.
How about the audience here? Are there questions or comments? You want to take it further? Yes.
This is a question for Kristen. I work with quite a large number of autistic pupils, and given the fact that they have, their thoughts have a deficiency in theory of mind and executive functioning, are you aware of any SEL programs that have been designed with autistic children in mind? And if so, how good are they?
So children with autism is one of the questions. Anybody else want to extend the discussion? Yes. Elizabeth.
I'm the Department of Social Policy and Intervention here. And I guess my question is regarding process evaluations of these programs and sort of along with the implementation of these programs, what are you able to collect? And I mean, I've worked with very transient student populations in the States, but I wonder kind of in high conflict areas, you know, maybe they've been moved to one spot and then are relatively stable, but kind of issues with dose and how do you on the spot adapt these programs so that we are reaching children for however little time they might be there?
Very good question about the evaluation. If we have a third from the audience, or do you have one from? Yes.
Yeah, so Grace Greenwell, who's a law student practicing in the rural United States, an MSc in Human Rights from LSE, asked, or stated at first, I love the discussion of pluralism, i.e. tolerance, openness, and understanding towards other people's cultures, social structures, values, and faiths. Can you say more about the process of teaching, learning pluralism? Is it necessary to separate the skills required to support diversity of thought from the content of those thoughts and beliefs? Do you see a potential for pluralism to reinforce or prop up oppressive systems? Must all ideas be given equal footing?
So, okay, we have three. I'm going to begin with the last, which I think is really the biggest. It's the process of teaching and learning and pluralism. And what was the one about equal? I missed the last bit. Are they all equal? No.
Must all ideas be given equal footing?
Equal footing. So we have that. I'm just going to list what we're going to discuss, and then I'll put it to the panel. Then there was a question from Elizabeth on process evaluation. How do you cope with fidelity to a manual? Is there a manual? Do you have dose? How do you keep track of dose? So kind of doing process evaluation in these really hard conditions. And then the question from the Department of Education, which is children with autism. So let's begin with the pluralism question. And I think that's Alison's question. It has your name on it.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. Thank you. First of all, we don't really teach pluralism as such. It's something that, in the same way as social emotional learning, should be integrated through our programming. And to be honest, we've done it fairly implicitly in terms of AKF for education up until now. So the work on social emotional learning is part of the attempt to focus more specifically on it and to be able to measure more clearly what we're doing. But certainly it would be something that may be done quite implicitly anyway, depending on the context. And I think this point about the separating the skills from the content of the thoughts is very important, because I think we would definitely be focusing on the skills rather than the content, although of course the curriculum is going to be very important here and the context will be very important, but AKF certainly normally doesn't get involved in curriculum. That's set by governments. But there is of course that tricky issue about, as is referred to in the question, about propping up unpleasant regimes through that process. So I think the point here to be made is that pluralism needs to come with an ethical approach. Not all ideas are equal, no. There is a certain ethic that requires you to, the sense of respect for another human being is the fundamental one, I think. So that needs to be your benchmark. So if something is going to come into conflict with that, then pluralism is going to...
That was the most difficult question we've had. The process evaluation, which question came from Elizabeth here in SBI, I think we'll go to Anita, because you were reporting an evaluation that's being done.
Yeah.
And you do it under very difficult circumstances.
We do, but I wouldn't be able to speak to the detail. I just know the setup is, for example, in Niger, they have control arms and a control group. There is a lot of movement, and I know there was a lot of discussion around sample sizes to factor in that movement. One arm is one treatment arm is going to get mindfulness interventions, and another treatment arm is going to get brain game interventions. And that's kind of all I...
With random assignment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the group level, so
Yeah.
it'll be multi-level data?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's as rigorous as we could possibly do in
difficult
in DIFA in Niger. Yeah.
The last question I'm going to ask for Kristen.
I will do that. Can
Yes,
I
yes,
can I
go
also
ahead,
make a comment?
add.
So you can calculate different levels of program effects, right? So you can have your intent to treat, if you will, which is everybody that you enrolled, but then you've got the issue of a ton of mobility in some of these areas. All those kids aren't going to get same dose, aren't going to get, as you pointed out, aren't going to get even the program for more than one session. If yours was daily, right? So that's probably, they might get more than one session. But if it's once a week or something like that, the project that I'm working on in Uganda is once a week, they might only get 1 week. And you can calculate the effect sizes for each level of your dose as well to sort of get a sense of how much is enough to really be meaningful for your outcomes that you're looking at. But doing it with, I worked with Head Start centers in Chicago, and Chicago is, for those who don't know Chicago, it's not a very nice city, particularly the south side of Chicago, and particularly not right now. And kids are moving all the time because, for safety reasons, if nothing else. And so they're in and out of these, we did a cluster randomized trial. And we had to determine a certain level of dose that was acceptable that these kids would be included in our analyses. So it was an 18-week session, and if they got 12 of the weeks, they were included in all of the analyses. And if they got 9 of the weeks, they were included in some of the sort of the analyses we expected would be easier to detect some sort of an association. So there are lots of ways you can do
the
that.
medics would call that per protocol analysis,
Exactly.
wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Will you take the autism question? Because I think
I will.
you are the one.
Mm-hmm. I will do my best with it. I do have some resources that I can share with you, so maybe I can get your contact information afterwards, because I don't do autism, but I do know that there are programs that have been shown to be impactful. And you're absolutely right. Children, particularly young children with autism, aren't as good at that theory of mind idea, but they can be taught what's socially acceptable. So the programs that do exist for young children with autism teach children the quote-unquote right response in a social situation. They don't necessarily grasp that theory of mind or the empathy or the perspective taking in the way that you and I might, but what they do know is this is how we behave. And that's really what the programs out there that teach these socio-emotional skills to children with autism are actually teaching the behaviors more than the thinking and the processing the way we might teach it in classrooms with, like we talked about today. But there are a couple in the United States that I think are easily, they can be context relevant easily. They're not specifically about that U.S. context that I'd be happy to share with you.
And we'll do that afterwards.
Yeah.
We have to end at 6:30, but I asked at the very beginning, before we came into the room, what were the aims of the organizers of this day? And I'll tell you what it was, and then you can think about whether you think that aim. The aim of this session is to link academic and scholarly work on socio-emotional learning with its practical implications in different educational contexts. They should include low-income children and countries, emergency situations, but also linking this scholarly academic work to our global understanding of what quality education is and why social emotional learning is important. I think they've absolutely achieved their aims, and let's thank them. And if you have any questions, the speakers will talk. We have wine. Oh God, I forgot. Of all the people in the world to forget you have wine. I'm mortified.
Kathy, I'd
This
just
is
like
my specialty in life.
thank you very much for accepting our invitation from AKF to chair for us today.
It was a
It's been a pleasure, and we're very, very happy that you've been able to do that for us. Thank you.
We now have wine, and I think Alison might be one of your hosts. Are you for the wine?
Yes.
Okay,
Well, yes.
and those of you who know about wine tasting, do a little wine tasting, and everybody stand, you're welcome.
Thank you.